us. Where are we at this point? Dr. McCabe, may I introduce you? Should we start there?
Yeah, please do.
And joining us today is Dr. McCabe. Dr. McCabe has hosted over 250 podcasts on his show. He's done autism with Dr. Andy and healthylife.net radio. He worked to create one of the first public school programs for autistic kids in New Jersey way back in 1992, and then again this year. He has published a book by the name of Autism Essentials, which includes 33 chapters from different specialists on the areas of the causes, how to prevent, how to remediate, educate, and vocational law around all sorts of different issues. And he has donated all of the profits from the sales of that book to the Autism Trust. So thank you very much, Dr. McCabe, for hosting this today. And I'm looking forward to getting to know you much better.
And I as well, Sarge. I was reading about you, and I'm fascinated by your work, and I'm really looking forward to learning more from you today, as our listeners will. And if I may, I'd like to now introduce you so that everybody knows your background. And so Sargent Goodchild Jr. recovered from a devastating brain injury at birth, which was amplified by vaccines at the age of 5. By the age of 8, he had been diagnosed with severe epilepsy. His mother was told he had autism. That's when it was still 1 in 10,000. And his father was told he had Huntington's disease and would likely die by the age of 8. The medical prognosis was that he was uneducable and should be institutionalized. Fortunately, his parents chose a different route, which led to his full recovery. And now today, Sarge is a father, the owner of Active Healing, and for the last 26 years, he's been helping children recover from a broad variety of developmental, behavioral, and educational challenges. Additionally, he's on the board of Health Choice for Action, which advocates for medical and religious freedoms in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, as well as on the board of Healing Complex Kids. So what a great background, Sergeant. And certainly after living through what you lived through, it's just so powerful that you are who you are right now. So let's continue on. And where would you like to take us next?
Well, I'm going to share a PowerPoint presentation that I put together for us. So I'm going to share my screen. To our audience, I'm sorry for the technical difficulties, and I'm sorry for the late start to the show. That I guess I will accept the blame for that and tell you that it's been a very busy day in my office today. I began my morning with testimony towards Bears reporting bill before the State House via Zoom this morning. It was a very long and drawn out process. There were a lot of people in the queue waiting to testify. It's a very interesting bill that we have in front of the State House, in which it would educate doctors on what adverse events are likely to follow the administration of vaccines, and so that they're better able to report those to the VAERS reporting system, as well as training them in how to report them to the VAERS system, because only a very small fraction of doctors recognize adverse events following vaccines, and even less of them get reported to VAERS. So we've submitted I am on the board of something called Health Choice for Action, Massachusetts. And this is a bill that we've submitted, as well as fighting bills that would remove religious and medical exemptions for vaccines. So it was a rather busy morning for me this morning. And then I've got an office um, that treats a very broad spectrum of people in Beverly, Massachusetts. The name of this show is The New Paradigm for Autism Healing, but it really should go on to say, and epilepsy, attachment bonding disorders, reactive attachment, behavioral disorders, learning disabilities, ADHD, cerebral palsy, and on and on. So for 26 years, I have been in this field, and I now find myself supporting people with very complex medical issues, such as Lyme-borne dementia. I support people who have all sorts of diagnoses, from cancer to concussions to my typical work with neurological reorganization.
Sarge, if you don't mind, could I pop in for just a second here?
Of course.
You know, I am fascinated by your story. And I know that in the bio, we gave a brief outline. Would you mind filling us in on a little more? How did this happen? How did they take you at age 8 and get you to where you are today? Or is that going to be something that you're going to be talking about with the
I am going to address that in just a few moments, Dr. McCabe. But I'm glad you brought it up. I'm very interested in telling my story.
Wonderful, wonderful.
So what you're looking at on your screen right now, there can be a tremendous difference between the capabilities that a child is showing us in the moment at whatever age he or she might be, and the true potential of that child. So in this picture, what you're seeing is one of the very first clients of active healing. He is a boy about 8 years old, and you can, I'm not sure how well all of our participants are going to be able to see this picture, so I'm going to point out a few things. If you take a really good look at this picture, you'll notice that this child has a fairly broad smile on his face, but you'll also notice that there don't appear to be any teeth in the picture. You'll also notice that his eyes, especially his right eye, appear to be very swollen, almost like he's been in a boxing battle. His eyes are nearly swollen shut. And then further examination will also show you that the way that he's holding the fish in his left hand looks rather awkward. So that boy had a severe case of epilepsy. He was on an enormous amount of medications, and the medications left him so toxic that he drooled an enormous amount. He remembers drooling all over his paperwork. And you can see the toxicity has swollen all of his facial features. So his eyes are swollen as a result of the intoxication from the medications. And his gums are so inflamed and engorged that they have swallowed up his teeth. So this child used to have to go to the dentist at regular intervals, and they would take a surgical blade and cut his gums back over his teeth. But when they did that, they were not able to put any additional medications in his system, because they were at risk of slipping him into a medically induced coma should they have done that, because of the level of anticonvulsants and other medications that he was on. This child was told that he should be institutionalized. The parents were told that he had autism. The dad was told that he most likely had Huntington's disease or Huntington's chorea, and he wouldn't live past the age of 8. And that his parents should really focus their attention on his younger and healthy sister and brother, and visit him in the institution when the opportunity arose. So this child had very few capabilities when we looked at him at the age of 8. that child was me. So at the age of 8, I was deemed mentally retarded and uneducable. When they did put me in a classroom, they put me in a classroom in the back of a classroom in an individual study carrel, so that I could not see the blackboard, I could not see the teacher, I could not see any of my classmates. But for someone with my level of disability, that was considered what I should be receiving as part of my free and appropriate education. So when people saw me, whether it was doctors at Children's Hospital or friends and family, no one saw me as having the potential to be the adult that I have grown to become in the years since. I think this is as good a time as any to share with you one of my favorite quotes. And that quote is that our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate, but our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that frightens us the most. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, and fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small doesn't serve the world. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. So it's been a great honor of mine to be able to live in harmony with that quote for the past 26 years. On the right of this picture, you can see my family. So I am conveniently poised in the back because I'm the least good looking of the bunch. And we've got my son, who's now 19. He's probably 16 in that picture. My lovely wife, Allison. And to the left in this picture, what we have is 3 pins that were just put into my right hip after a slacklining accident. And in the picture directly below that, that is me purchasing a brand new road bike that I took on a 35-mile ride 12 days after the accident that ended up with those 3 screws in my hip. Wow. We are filled with potential. I have ridden my bicycle across the country twice. I have sailed boats offshore. I've lived for 3 months in Madrid and learned how to speak Spanish. I cannot speak a lick anymore, but back in high school, I was quite good. And I've had a very, very fulfilling life, given a very poor prognosis from the medical community when I was young. And I'm what my father-in-law calls his alternative sports son-in-law. I tend to not be very into team sports. I love cycling, I love mountain biking, I love windsurfing, skateboarding, skiing. So my drive to move is a very strong drive. In the middle picture, this is Bridger Bowl in Montana. I hiked out across that peak, and you can see where I began skiing down at the start and where I finished. That was probably the steepest terrain that I've ever skied, and I'm very much looking forward to it. So I've gone from a kid who was very unathletic and poorly coordinated to someone who I feel is very athletic, even given my age. Movement disorders are not a separate disability. Movement disorders are frequently a major contributing factor to the underlying challenges that your child or you may be facing. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is really simple. So there's a natural law that says that function determines structure and structure determines function. So if we sit in front of the television all day long and we watch television, eat potato chips, and drink Budweiser, the function of those doing that routinely in your life is going to lead to a physical structure that we can all picture. It's going to lead to a beer belly and someone who's not in particularly good shape. Whereas if we eat kale and we practice a martial art or some sort of mindfulness or engage in physical sports, so we eat well, we rest properly, and we exercise appropriately, it's going to lead to a completely different physical structure. Likewise, in that slide that I showed a few minutes ago, if we break your leg or we snap your femur neck, it's going to change, the structural change is going to change the way that you walk. So we're going to alter the function. So this is a loop and it cannot be broken. And it's really easy for most people to understand how when, if we put a child down on the floor and they're learning how to crawl on their stomachs, so in a military crawl, most people can visualize pretty easily how when that child's getting a really efficient toe dig and launching themselves off their leg, like propelling themselves forward on their stomach through the use of that foot and that leg, how that would begin to arch the bottoms of the feet. We can understand how that stretches the heel cords. We can intellectualize about how that might shape the hip sockets and help create secondary curves in the spine. But we tend to stop at the anatomical side of things. And we don't take that to the more important aspect, which is what's happening neurologically for the child. So I'm a practitioner of something called neurological reorganization. And what we use is something called an ontogeny of human neurological functions. These are, what we've done is, in economics, there's a law called Pareto's law. Pareto's law says that 80% of what we do only gives us 20% of our results. But the inverse is that 20% of what we do gives us 80% of our results. So over time, what has happened is we've been able to cherry pick the 20% of a child's developmental process that leads to 80% of their neurological growth. And that 20% is listed on this chart. What we can do is we can leverage this 20% of a child's developmental process, and we can put a lot of time and effort into perfecting these specific skills. As we do that, we accelerate that child's maturity, neurological maturity, let me be more specific. So if we have a child who's got autism, or we have a child who has cerebral palsy or an attachment bonding disorder, such as reactive attachment disorder, we can use this chart in two ways. One, because we know that there are very specific areas of the brain that correlate with very specific, so there are very specific functions that we're able to perform that correlate to very specific structures in the brain. We can use this chart to create a diagnostic trail of evidence that shows us which areas of the brain are weak. And then we can turn it on its head, and we can emphasize a certain amount of time each day that we're putting into those developmental milestones to challenge and grow and mature those parts of the brain. This is ultimately what my parents did for me. My parents ended up consulting a physical therapist by the name of Art Sandler. And Art Sandler was the first person to ever sit my parents down and say, your son is brain injured. And everything that you are doing right now is to treat a symptom of the brain injury, but nothing that you are doing right now is to treat the brain injury itself. And that was the first time that my parents felt a glimmer of hope. They had obviously, in order for me to become that toxic to all the medications, they had done their due diligence with the medical community, and it had gotten them and me really nowhere. So it wasn't hard for them to see what Art was speaking to them about and decide that it was worthwhile to go and put it in place. This is Art's chart. Art unfortunately passed several years ago. I had the chance to work with him on a couple of collaborative efforts before he passed away, and obviously had permission to use this chart and whatnot. Art put together a program for me based on this chart that my parents took home and put into play in the privacy of my house, where my mother became my central therapist. And within 10 months of having begun that program, I was off of every seizure medication that I'd been taking for the past 5 years. And I have not had a seizure since. So I began the program right at about 9 years of age. I completed the program by the time I was 13. But by the time I was 10, I'd already had my last seizure. I'm currently 52 years old, and I have not had a seizure in over 42 years, despite obviously breaking bones and being in some rather extreme sports. I tell all of the participants on this webinar, I share this story with not because there was something special about me and not because there was something special about my family that gave me the ability to make this recovery. I tell this story because it's a testimony to the recovery potential that we are all endowed with. And in the words of Les Brown, someone's opinion of you or your child does not have to become your reality. There are an enormous amount of services available, far more services available now than there were in the mid-70s when I was going through this program. I could literally take any part of the conversation that we've had so far and explode it into a 2 or 3 hour webinar by itself. But I think at this point, it would probably be best for me to just stop and see if there are questions and answers from any of the participants who are listening.
Yeah, if I may, Sarge, as I said earlier, I'm fascinated by everything you're talking about. And where would folks be able to find the type of services that you had starting at about age 8? Is there a listing? Is there some kind of market?
If you're counting fairly liberally, there's about maybe 2 dozen of us in the United States currently doing this work. And I will post up a website at the end of on the resources or whatever we give at the end of this webinar, where people will be able to go and find practitioners.
Excellent. Yes.
Sargent had a question for you. My name is Bob. So, the question is, till what age you can do it? If there's an adult child who is, say, 24 and he has learning difficulties, can he, be impacted by what you are doing? He has a lot of talent, but, so he said that capabilities versus, potential. But, unfortunately, because of ADHD, focus and attention issues, he's not able to, reading comprehension has gone down. He has ocular motion dysfunction. So all those things are there. So can he take advantage at a later age, or 24, to do something? He has been very active in sports. He represented Team USA in World Games and all of that in cycling. All of that he has done, but still that learning part of it has been a big issue.
So there's an enormous amount that we can do for your child. And it doesn't begin or end with the process of neurodevelopmental movement and the sort of services that I offer. There's a very strong likelihood that your son is dealing with a retained symmetric tonic neck reflex, and that is greatly contributing to his diagnosis of ADHD. There's also a very good chance that if I were to watch your son crawl on his stomach, that I would see some sort of an aberrant pattern, which is likely not only contributing to a dysfunction in a part of his brain called the pons, but it is also implicated as a factor in the oculomotor dysfunction that he is presenting with. What I have found in my practice is that very few optometrists can effectively evaluate a child who's got significant disabilities. It takes someone with an optometrist with a great amount of skill. I usually refer, I take kind of a two-pronged approach with these kids. I like to start with the neurodevelopmental process with them and see how much progress we can make, and I can kind of benchmark what's going on in their vision. If I feel like their vision isn't improving or we've stalled, plateaued, then what I typically do is I will refer you to an optometrist who specializes in something called Neuro-Optometric Rehabilitation. They have a very different model of vision from most even behavioral or developmental optometrists. And I find that they can be really successful with these kids. There's a lot of different things that I advocate for in situations like this, but detox is crucial for these kids. Eliminating foods that are that they might have food sensitivities towards, looking at the biomedical aspect, looking at the structural aspect, etc. But the oldest kid that I've ever worked with who had a diagnosis of autism and a whole bunch of really, he was a very significantly impaired kid. He didn't start until he was 30. So 24 is not a daunting age for me. It is mostly in the ability of the parents to get the child down on the floor and do the physically rigorous work that I'm going to be asking them to do.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have another question from someone?
We do, Dr. McCabe. Jeff Ellington has in the comments, what's the connection to Asperger's? And Jeff, if you unmute yourself, if you want to expand on that, that'd be great. Oh, you're still muted, Jeff. There you go.
Sure. So Sargent, I have a great friend. I just sent you his LinkedIn contact. He's an ophthalmologist, a Harvard-trained ophthalmologist in Nashville. And
I have clients in Nashville. That's perfect. I have a big group.
So, and he has a daughter that I think may have gone to med school, but she has Asperger's. And so I'm just wondering, you talk about a physician who is an ophthalmologist who's quite sensitive to all of this stuff. And so I wonder, where's Asperger's on this sort of spectrum? It's somewhere there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So Asperger's, you used to have autism, and then you had Asperger's, and then you had pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified. You had global developmental delay, and all of these other things that have now come under one umbrella, kind of autism spectrum disorders. Asperger's is an interesting one. If we have a young woman who has been able to graduate from medical school with Asperger's, it would be rather forward of me to say that I could do anything to help her. if she felt like her quality of life was being negatively impacted by Asperger's and she wanted to work with me, I would be open to it. We can, you know, there are so many different aspects to Asperger's. But I wouldn't, if she's graduated from medical school, then she's able to care for herself. She's completely independent, and she may see Asperger's as truly a gift for herself.
Yeah, maybe so. Anyway, I just, you know, since this was sort of the line of conversation, I thought it was worth mentioning. I haven't spoken to my friend, you know, at least about this in a few years, but he probably would want to know about you, I would think.
I would be very happy to have a conversation with him, especially since I'm due in Nashville in probably under a month. I've got a group of, I don't know, 10 families in Nashville that I travel to see every 4 months. So I could certainly work in a visit with him during one of those trips.
Yeah, well, I may try to be there when you're there. I think be in Atlanta around the 21st, 22nd. If it's right after that, I might try to, I'm overdue for a trip to Nashville myself.
Well, that'd be fun.
Yeah.
Do we have another question? We have people lined up. We have Sam. How about Mark Froman? Mark, do you have a question?
I don't see anybody who has their hand up, but I was wondering if Sarge could go a little bit more into the pawns and how that presents in his practice.
I'd be happy to. Let me bring up an ontogeny so that we can reference it during the conversation. All right. All right, so let's see if I can do a screen share here. All right, are you able to see that ontogeny?
Yes. Oh, no, sorry, it's just your files.
It's
Sorry
just
about
my
that, I saw something.
Huh. All right, so let's stop. Oh, I see why. Stop share. Let's try this again. It should be that one. Is that it now?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. All right. So what we can see from this, so this is not the full thing, but this is just a section of the ontogeny of human neurological functions. So what we can see from this, everything in red are the functions that are associated with the pawns. So from a visual perspective, we have the child seeing in silhouettes. They have a response to threatening sounds. They have an awareness of pain, temperature, and discomfort. They're doing some initial crawling on their stomachs in a military type of pattern. They've got vital sounds and they've got a vital release. So enough of the brain has matured at this point that they know when it's safe to let go of something. So we develop a really tight grasp first. It's safer to hold on to something and cling to it tightly, and we wait till the brain develops a little bit before we learn how to let go with ease. So when we're looking at someone who's got dysfunction in the pons, we are looking at someone that's where all of our sensory integration disorder comes from, is directly from the pons. So kids who have what I call hot foot disease, where they're kind of always dancing around on their feet because the seam on the sock has to line up just perfectly and the sneaker can't be tied too loose and it can't be tied too tight. And they're just never comfortable in their own skin. They won't wear jeans, or they'll only wear jeans. They hate corduroys. They won't wear long sleeves. They have a difficulty transitioning between types of clothing, depending on, going from the winter to the fall is a difficult transition, just as going from the summer into the fall is another difficult transition. They have high pain thresholds. They have low pain thresholds. They've got variable pain thresholds. In my opinion, all of that originates from the PONS. I also feel the PONS is where we get a sense of belonging. It makes us feel like we belong in the family, we belong in the classroom, we belong in the school building, we belong in the community. And so I feel when there's disorganization or dysfunction within the PONS, we can fracture that ability to bond in a normal, healthy way. And with the PONS, we also see trouble with tracking across the horizontal plane. So you'll have especially trouble crossing midline. When tracking something across the midline, we should be able to go nice and smooth across that midline. Children who have issues in the PONS usually have trouble with tracking just across that horizontal midline. And so I also feel like the PONS has a huge play in the development of language. And so you'll have kids who are language delayed because of dysfunction or disorganization within the PONS. So the PONS is kids can have problems within the medulla, but they're generally not severe problems because the medulla is what gives us our life-preserving functions. So to have a huge dysfunction in the medulla means that you're having trouble just maintaining your life. So it's much more typical to see kids in my office anyways with damage in the PONS. And most of the kids who come through this office, we find that's where we have to start their program. And then we shift into the midbrain structures, and then we shift into the cortical structures after that. So Jane, does that answer your question fully, or have I missed a point?
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. No, that was a great description. I just remember you speaking about that earlier, about, the sense of belonging. And, can you maybe explain a couple of the devices that you use that help create that space so that you can start to get some recovery in the PONS and other things that you do for these clients that you see with this type of issue?
So when I'm working with a child who has neurological disorganization or some sort of neurological challenge, whatever it might be, the focal point is going to be stimulation through movement and their sense of touch. So one of the things that happens when a child goes through a typical occupational therapy program or a physical therapy program is the kids are taught how to do things through the use of language. So we instruct them verbally on what they need to be doing, or we instruct them verbally on something that they shouldn't be doing. And unfortunately, that circumvents a lot of the work that if we're trying to work at the level of the PONS, or we're trying to work at the level of the midbrain, or the cerebellum, or the occipital lobe, or whatever we might be trying to do, none of those have the capacity for language, right? They don't understand spoken language, and those parts of the brain don't understand written language. The only part of the brain that understands that are a couple of small pieces of the cortex. In order to speak to all those subcortical areas of the brain, we have to use the language that appeals to them, which is touch and movement. So one of the things that we'll do for a child who has dysfunction in the PONS or in the midbrain structures is we'll lay them down on a table, and I'll have generally two adults take them through these really choreographed movements where the child is turning their head and the parents are manipulating the arms and legs based on where the head is in its movement. And what this is doing is it's showing the child what it feels like to move in a healthy movement pattern. So we're inputting into their system a healthy developmental pattern. And as soon as that series of exercises is completed, then what we're doing is we're putting the child down on the floor so that he can execute that movement. And it's the combination of those two things that is responsible for really triggering a lot of maturity at different levels in the brain. And Jane, I think what you were alluding to is the fact that sometimes we have to do some other things in order to allow all that stimulation to really take hold and manifest itself. And certainly one of the big things that we do at Active Healing as a supportive service for the kids who are coming in for neurodevelopmental movement is a lot of detoxification. So I use sound-based whole body vibration machines to stimulate the entire lymphatic system. That has been phenomenal for my kids with cerebral palsy because it seems to take all the tension out of the system. And whereas most kids with cerebral palsy will get internal rotation of all of the joints, where they're returning almost to a fetal position, I believe that's due to stress in the system more than it's due directly to the cerebral palsy. It's a result of the stress that the body's in overall, manifesting in this internal rotation. You put them on a whole body vibration machine, it eliminates a lot of the stress, and you see external rotation of all of the joints, and the child begins to literally open up to the world. It's also a great way to stimulate the lymphatic system, and it is a great precursor. It kind of primes the pump for any detoxification service that we might do afterwards. So when we're talking kids, usually the second piece of that puzzle as far as detoxification is going to be concerned will be an ion cleanse detoxifying foot bath. I use what I feel is the best equipment on the market from a company called A Major Difference. You don't need to wear a grounding strap. The terminals can be submerged in the water without fear of any electric shock. And you have both polarities can be introduced to the water. So we can charge the ions that we're making within the water to either be positively charged or negatively charged, and thus go after the toxins of the opposite polarity. I have found these foot baths to be extremely useful in all sorts, in supporting clients with all sorts of different health challenges. But when it comes to kids on the autism spectrum, I really feel James Lyons Wheeler, who's a PhD, who wrote a book in which he reviewed 2,000 studies on kids with autism. I think his description of what autism is probably one of the most accurate that I've ever heard. It's a cellular detoxification problem. And so being able to clean out these kids' filters is a crucial aspect of recovering them. And sometimes it helps put out the fire that allows the developmental work to go even smoother.
Sarge, may I jump in for just 1 second? I know we're running out of time, but I'd like to underline something that you just talked about. A Major Difference, an ion cleanse, was a supporter of my program, and I have met with the folks who developed it, and I couldn't say enough good things about it. I've used it personally and find that the things that come out of my own body, it just amazes me. My family uses it as well. So if you don't mind me giving a plug to A Major Difference in Ion Cleanse, I fully support what you just talked about.
Yeah, I think they're an amazing company, and I don't think they'll mind being plugged by either one of us.
Yeah.
I also use far infrared saunas, and I do something called audio-visual entrainment. I do cranial electrical stimulation. What else? Oh, and I do pulsed electromagnetic field therapy. So I have quite kind of an array of offerings at Active Healing. And I'm in the fortunate position now. I mean, for 20 years in my career, I really only focused on kids with neurological disabilities. And now I find myself supporting people who have orthopedic problems, people who have complex health conditions, people who have Lyme, people who have dementia, people who have cancer, people who have concussions. It's really been interesting. I've got, for the last 3 weeks, I've had a woman coming in by the name of Lori, who is training to run the Badwater 135-mile race through Hell's Canyon. So she is going to run for 35 hours straight through 120-degree heat in the end of July.
Wow.
And she's doing all of her training and all of her recovery. Well, she's doing not all, certainly, because she's, but she's doing, she's utilizing a lot of my services to help her do her heat training and to help her recover from the training she does outside of this office. So it's been really, the last 5.5 years have been really interesting from a business perspective. It's been fun.
Sargent, a quick question. Do you use EEG?
I use audio. So traditionally I've used audio-visual entrainment, and I've been very, very happy with audio-visual entrainment. The equipment is, it's brainwave entrainment. And the difference between audio-visual entrainment and EEG neurofeedback is that with audio-visual entrainment, you are taking the child out of the feedback loop and you're asking them to go into a state of a really positive state of dissociation, where they can let go of time and they can let go of all their problems and they can go into a state of deep relaxation and rejuvenation. And it's you know, especially compared to EEG neurofeedback or quantitative EEG neurofeedback, it's, you know, a fraction of the cost. That said, there are some EEG pieces of equipment out there that I'm really interested in and that I'm thinking about bringing into the fold at Active Healing.
Yeah. I'm working with a lot of startups in the space. You know, my focus is how can we create new technologies, you know, which can improve the quality of life for this community. So we are looking at startups, we are encouraging, we are mentoring them in this space. And, you know, they're coming up with very innovative products, especially in augmented reality, robotics, neurofeedback, you know, and all that. I would really like to talk to you further, if it's okay with you.
Yes, I will get you out my contact information, but you can also just, I put up, I don't know if you copied down my office number, but it's 978-969. Sorry,
Yes.
did you get?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
978-969-6593.
Yeah. And do you come to New Jersey by any chance?
I stopped traveling to the New Jersey area several years ago just because the office here is so busy.
Okay.
That you know, so I've got kind of, I used to travel to Sheridan, Wyoming, Austin, Texas, Nashville, Tennessee, and New York. And right now I've had to limit it just to Nashville to be able to spend enough hours here to support what I've got going on in this practice.
Great. Thanks, Sargent.
Yeah. We're coming to the end of our show, Sarge, and this video will be available online in a few days. Is that correct?
Yes, this video I think will be available by Monday, I think.
Okay. And also,
Yep, by Sunday or Monday, it'll be on the Marketplace for Health, Wealth, and Freedom. If you go under Continuing the Conversation, it'll be on YouTube, Brighteon, BitChute, and Rumble, and you'll see it on the page. We'll have links to all of those different
before we close
sites.
out, Sarge, if I could, I'd just like to give you a little impression of what I feel today after talking with you. I've been in this field for about 40 years, worked with thousands of people, and I have never met anyone like you. I've never met anyone who talks with such knowledge about a broad range of medical issues. And I really congratulate you, and I hope someday to meet you, because you're definitely outside the box in a very good way.
Well, I mean, that's probably the privilege of not being licensed in anything, right? So I guess I will end by simply saying that having gone through this program as a child and having spent 4 years, I lived in a nice house on a private beach, and I had windows on 3 sides of my room because of the way the house was constructed. So out of one set of windows, I could watch all my friends water skiing and windsurfing out one window. Out the other window, I could see all my friends playing at the town wharf. And out the other window, I could watch all my friends playing in the driveway. While I stayed upstairs in my bedroom with my mother, learning how to crawl, learning how to creep, hanging upside down by my knees, and doing something called suspended inverted rotation, doing a process of hypercapnia to teach me how to be a deep breather, and going through a really rigorous physical routine every day that I did not enjoy. I would have much rather been outside playing with my friends and living a more normal childhood. And so it's always been my desire to speed this process up as much as I can. And I have spent a lot of time trying to bring into play all sorts of technologies that will allow me to do that. And I'm afraid to say that at the same time, I think that the kids that we're encountering today are even more damaged than a lot of the kids were in the 70s. And I think it's much more hidden. And I hope that as a society, we can do a lot more to study our vulnerable subpopulation and protect them from the toxins that they so frequently encounter, not only outdoors, but during well baby visits to their doctors.
Well, Sarge, this has been a great pleasure, and I'd like to thank Jane Dolan for inviting me to be here. I'd like to thank all of our participants, and I just can't wait to watch this again when it comes out in a couple of days. So thanks again. You are a truly gifted man, and it's wonderful what you're doing for humanity.